The morning I woke up to find an official-looking notice stapled to my cabin door. I knew my peaceful retirement in the Colorado mountains was about to get complicated. I had bought this place 15 years ago, back when the development was just starting and the HOA rules were simple enough to fit on a single page. My name is Daniel Young, and after 30 years working construction in Denver, I wanted nothing more than to spend my golden years fishing, raiding, and watching the seasons change from my front porch. The cabin was modest but sturdy, built to withstand the harsh winters that came with living at 8,000 feet elevation in Larkspur, Colorado. The notice was dated 3 days after the worst blizzard we had seen in a decade. 26 inches of snow had fallen in less than 48 hours, with winds that howled through the pine trees like something out of a horror movie. The entire development had been without power for 2 days, and the main road did not get plowed until day 3. But my cabin had held up just fine, the same way it had through countless other storms. The paper flapping in the cold morning breeze declared that my property had sustained structural damage during the recent weather event and was deemed unsafe for occupation. I had 24 hours to vacate the premises pending a full structural engineering assessment. It was signed by Patricia Henderson, the current HOA president, a woman I had only met twice and disliked both times. I stood there in my thermal underwear and bathrobe, coffee mug steaming in my hand, reading the notice 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. My cabin was fine. More than fine, actually. I had checked everything myself the morning after the storm cleared. The roof was solid, no leaks anywhere, the foundation showed no cracks, and all the windows and doors were intact. I had built enough houses in my career to know what structural damage looked like, and my cabin had none. I called the HOA office as soon as it opened at 9. A bored-sounding woman who introduced herself as the administrative assistant told me that multiple properties had been flagged for inspection after the storm, and that mine had been identified as having visible damage from the road. "What visible damage?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "I do not have those details, sir. You will need to speak with Mrs. Henderson. Then put her on. She is not available right now. She is conducting property assessments. Tell her to assess my property with me standing right there. I want to see this supposed damage." The assistant said she would pass along the message and hung up. I got dressed, pulled on my boots, and walked the entire perimeter of my cabin. Nothing, not a single thing wrong. The deck was clear, the siding intact, the chimney straight and true. I even climbed up on the roof with my ladder, something my doctor would probably yell at me for at 63 years old, but I needed to see for myself. The shingles were all in place, and the flashing around the chimney and vents looked perfect. By noon, I was angry enough to drive down to the HOA office myself. It was located in what used to be the sales center for the development, a small building near the entrance with vinyl siding and fake stone veneer that was already peeling off in places. I found Patricia Henderson sitting behind a desk that was too large for the room, typing on her computer with the kind of aggressive keystrokes that suggested she was composing a strongly worded email. She was exactly what I expected. Blonde hair with dark roots, cut in that severe, angled bob that seemed to be the official hairstyle of people who enjoyed enforcing petty rules. She wore a cream-colored sweater with a pattern of small snowflakes, which felt inappropriate given that she was trying to kick people out of their homes because of snow. She looked up when I entered, and her expression immediately shifted to what I can only describe as practiced concern. "Mr. Young," she said, standing up, "I was hoping you would come by. I got your notice, want to explain what damage you think my cabin has. Please sit down." She gestured to a chair across from her desk. I will stand. She sat back down, folding her hands on the desk. Mr. Young, I understand this is upsetting, but we have a responsibility to all residents to ensure the safety of the community. The recent storm was unprecedented in its severity. My cabin is fine. According to our preliminary assessment, there are concerns about the structural integrity of several older properties, including yours. The amount of snow load on the roofs, the wind stress, the freeze-thaw cycles, all of these factors can cause hidden damage that might not be immediately visible to an untrained eye. I built houses for 30 years. My eye is plenty trained. She smiled the way people do when they have already decided they are right, and nothing you say will change their mind. I appreciate your experience, but the HOA board has decided that all flagged properties must undergo a professional structural engineering assessment before residents can continue occupying them. It is for your own safety. Who flagged my property? I did, during my drive-through assessment after the storm. And what did you see that concerned you? She pulled out a folder and opened it, showing me a photograph that had been printed on regular copy paper. It was my cabin taken from the road, partially obscured by snow-covered pine branches. She pointed to the roof. You can see here that the roof line appears to be sagging. I leaned closer. The photo was terrible quality, and the angle made everything look distorted. That is a shadow from the tree branches. The roof is not sagging. That is your opinion. The board disagrees. The board. How many people on the board have construction experience? That is not relevant. It is absolutely relevant if you are going to declare my home unsafe. She closed the folder. Mr. Young, the HOA covenants give us the authority to take emergency action to protect the health and safety of residents. You signed those covenants when you purchased your property. If you refuse to comply with the evacuation order, we will be forced to take legal action. Legal action. You are going to sue me for living in my own house that has nothing wrong with it. We will petition the county to condemn the property, yes. I felt my face getting hot. On what grounds? On the grounds that it poses an imminent danger due to structural compromise, based on a bad photo and your completely inexpert opinion. Her smile disappeared. Based on the HOA's professional assessment and our duty to protect the community. Now, you can either comply voluntarily, or we can make this much more difficult and expensive for everyone involved. The choice is yours. I stood there for a long moment, trying to decide if it was worth losing my temper. I decided it was not yet anyway. Fine, get your engineer out here. But I am not leaving my home until someone with actual credentials tells me there is a problem. The engineer is scheduled to conduct assessments starting tomorrow. You will need to vacate by tonight. Not happening. Mr. Young, you want me out, you get the sheriff to evict me. Until then, I am staying put. I left before she could respond, my heart pounding in my chest. I was not normally a confrontational person. 63 years on Earth had taught me that most battles were not worth fighting, but this was my home. I had paid it off 5 years ago. I had put my sweat and weekends into maintaining it, improving it, making it exactly what I wanted. And some HOA president with delusions of power was not going to take it from me based on a bad photograph. That evening, I called my son. Matthew was 34, lived in Boulder, and worked as a structural engineer for a firm that did assessments all over the Front Range. He had followed in my footsteps in a way, though with more education and better pay. I was proud of him, though I did not say it as often as I should. "Hey, Dad," he answered on the third ring. "Everything okay? Depends on your definition of okay. You busy tomorrow?" "I've got site visits in the morning." "Why?" I explained the situation. He listened without interrupting, which was something he had learned from his mother. She passed away 6 years ago, and there were still moments when I missed her so much it physically hurt. This was one of them. She would have known exactly what to say to Patricia Henderson to put her in her place without making an enemy. "That is ridiculous," Matthew said when I finished. "Your cabin is solid. I was just there at Christmas. I know it is solid. You know it is solid, but the HOA does not care. They cannot just condemn a property without cause. There are legal standards. They are bringing in an engineer tomorrow, some company they hired." There was a pause. "What company?" she did not say. Another pause, longer this time. "Dad, I need to make a call. I will call you back in 20 minutes. He hung up before I could ask why. I made myself dinner, reheated chili from 2 nights before, and tried not to think about the situation. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of orange and purple that never got old. I had moved up here for moments like this, for the peace and quiet and beauty that you could not find in the city. My phone rang 18 minutes after Matthew hung up. "Dad," he said, and I could hear something strange in his voice. "The company the HOA hired, it is Vanguard Engineering." "Okay. That is my company." I sat up straighter. "Your company?" "And I just checked the schedule. I am the engineer assigned to your property tomorrow." We both sat there in silence for a moment, processing this information. "Well," I said finally, "that is interesting. That is one word for it. Dad, this puts me in a weird position. I know. If I give you a favorable assessment, they could claim bias. If I am too harsh, you are screwed. So you do what you always do. You tell the truth. It is not that simple." "Yes, it is. You assess the property professionally, document everything, and write an honest report. If the cabin is sound, you say so. If it is not, you say that too. But you do not let the HOA bully you into finding problems that do not exist." He sighed. "You are right. I just hate being in the middle of this." "You are not in the middle. You are just doing your job. And honestly, I would rather have you do it than some engineer I have never met who might be in the HOA's pocket. Engineers do not work like that, Dad. We have professional standards." "Sure. And contractors are never supposed to cut corners, but I saw it happen every day for 30 years. "Point taken. Okay, I will be there at 10 tomorrow morning, and Dad." "Yeah. Do not tell the HOA I am your son. Not yet. Let me do the assessment first, then we will see what happens." "You think they do not know?" "Different last name, and I doubt they looked that closely at the crew assignments. As far as they know, I am just the engineer Vanguard sent." We hung up, and I spent the rest of the evening feeling slightly better about the situation. Matthew was good at his job, meticulous and honest. If anyone could document that my cabin was perfectly safe, it was him. The next morning was clear and cold, the kind of February day where the sun was bright but provided no warmth. I was up at 6, my usual time, and spent the morning making sure everything was accessible for the inspection. Not that there was much to do. The cabin was only 1,200 square feet, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, an open-plan kitchen and living room, and a small utility room with the water heater and furnace. Matthew arrived exactly at 10, driving his company truck with Vanguard Engineering printed on the side in blue letters. He was not alone. Patricia Henderson pulled up right behind him in a silver SUV that looked too expensive for someone living on an HOA president's salary, which was nothing because the position was volunteer. I met them at the front door. Matthew gave me a brief nod, professional and distant. Patricia was dressed like she was going to a business meeting, black slacks and a red blazer, her hair perfect despite the wind. "Mr. Young," she said, "this is Matthew Dalton, the engineer who will be conducting the assessment." "Madam," Matthew said, extending his hand to me. I shook it. impressed by his composure. "I understand there are concerns about the structural integrity of the property following the recent storm." "That is correct," Patricia said before I could answer. "I documented several issues during my preliminary assessment." "I will need to see that documentation," Matthew said, pulling out a tablet from his bag. She handed him a thin folder. He flipped through it, his expression neutral. "These are the photographs you took?" "Yes." "And your specific concerns are related to the roofline, among other things." "The entire structure is quite old." 15 years is not old for a properly maintained property, Matthew said mildly. "But let us start with a visual inspection. Mr. Young, may I come in?" "Of course." I held the door open and Matthew entered. Patricia started to follow, but Matthew turned. "Madam, I appreciate your interest, but I need to conduct this assessment independently. It is company policy to avoid any appearance of influence or bias." Her face tightened. "I am the HOA president. I have a right to be present. You have a right to receive the full report when it is completed. But the actual inspection needs to be conducted by me alone with the property owner present to answer technical questions. I am sure you understand." She did not understand, or did not want to, but she also could not argue without admitting she wanted to influence the results. "Fine. I will wait in my car." Matthew started in the living room, examining the walls, ceiling, and floor with careful attention. He took measurements, photographs, and notes on his tablet. He checked the windows, testing the frames and looking for any signs of shifting or cracking. He moved through the cabin methodically, spending almost an hour on the interior before we headed outside. Patricia watched from her SUV, her phone pressed to her ear. Probably calling other board members to complain about the engineer who would not let her hover. Matthew walked the perimeter of the cabin, checking the foundation, the siding, the corners where different walls met. He climbed onto the roof, spending 20 minutes up there examining every section. When he came down, his expression was carefully neutral. "Let me check the crawl space and attic, then I will need to do some measurements and calculations." We spent another hour going through every technical aspect of the cabin. Matthew was thorough in a way that made me proud. This was not a rubber stamp inspection. He was genuinely checking everything. Finally, around 1 in the afternoon, he packed up his equipment. Patricia emerged from her SUV immediately, as if she had been watching the whole time, which she probably had. "Well," she demanded. "I will have a full report completed within 48 hours, Matthew said. "It will be sent to both the HOA and Mr. Young." "But what is your preliminary assessment?" "I do not give preliminary assessments, madam. I complete my analysis and provide a documented report." "That is how professional engineering works. Surely you must have some indication, madam. I understand you are anxious for results, but I will not compromise the integrity of my work by providing opinions before I have completed my analysis. You will have the report in 48 hours. He nodded to me, loaded his equipment into his truck, and drove away. Patricia stood there looking like she wanted to argue with someone but had no one left to argue with. "This is not over, Mr. Young," she said. "I certainly hope it is not. I am looking forward to your apology when the report shows there is nothing wrong with my cabin." She got in her SUV and drove off, spraying gravel from her tires. I went inside and called Matthew from his cell. He answered after 2 rings. "That was impressive," I said, "just doing my job." And your cabin is in excellent condition. Better than excellent, actually. Everything is plumb, level, and true. No cracks, no sagging, no water damage, no signs of stress. The foundation is solid, the framing is solid, and whoever built it knew what they were doing. I built it. "I know, and it shows. Dad, there is absolutely nothing wrong with your cabin, not even minor stuff. It is one of the best maintained properties I have assessed in months. So you will say that in your report. I will document every measurement, every observation, and every calculation that supports that conclusion. The HOA wanted a professional assessment, and that is exactly what they are going to get. We talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. I spent the rest of the day feeling vindicated but also uneasy. Patricia Henderson did not strike me as someone who accepted being wrong gracefully. The next day, I got a call from the HOA's lawyer. His name was Richard something, and he had the smooth, confident voice of someone who made a living convincing people of things. Mr. Young, I represent the Larkspur Ridge HOA. I am calling to inform you that the association is prepared to offer you a settlement. A settlement for what? For your voluntary relocation from the property. The HOA recognizes that the evacuation order has caused inconvenience, and we are prepared to offer you 3 months of rent at a comparable property while repairs are made to your cabin. There is nothing to repair. The engineering assessment has not been completed yet, but you are already offering me money to leave. That is interesting timing. There was a pause. The offer is contingent on the assessment results, naturally, but we wanted to extend it in good faith. Good faith would be admitting there is nothing wrong with my cabin and rescinding the evacuation order. Mr. Young, I would advise you to take this seriously. If the assessment shows structural problems and you refuse to vacate, the HOA will have no choice but to pursue legal action. That could result in a forced sale of the property to cover remediation costs. I am pretty sure that is not how property law works. The HOA covenants give the association broad authority to address safety issues. I would recommend you review them with your own attorney. He hung up before I could respond. I sat there staring at my phone, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. This was not about safety. This was about something else. But what? I spent the rest of the morning digging through my copy of the HOA covenants, all 67 pages of tedious legalese. Most of it was standard stuff about maintaining your property, not painting your house purple, not leaving junk cars in the driveway. But buried in Section 42 was a clause about emergency remediation authority. If the HOA board determined that a property posed an imminent danger to other residents, they could take action to remedy the situation, including repairs or demolition, and assess the costs to the property owner. If the owner could not or would not pay, the HOA could place a lien on the property and eventually force a sale. It was a massive overreach of authority, but it was there in the covenants that every homeowner had signed, including me. I called a lawyer in Denver, someone I had worked with years ago on a contract dispute. His name was Tom Brennan, and he was semi-retired but still took cases that interested him. "Danny," he said when he answered, "been a while. Too long, I need some advice." I explained the situation. He listened, asking occasional questions. "They cannot actually do this, right?" I said when I finished. "They cannot just declare my house unsafe and force me to pay for fake repairs." "They can try," Tom said. "And honestly, Danny, they might succeed if you do not fight it properly." HOA law is tricky. The covenants give them a lot of authority, and judges tend to defer to the HOA unless there is clear evidence of abuse. The engineering report will show there is nothing wrong with the cabin. That will help. But if they want to push it, they can claim the engineer missed something, or hire their own engineer to contradict him, or argue that even if the cabin is fine now, it needs preventative repairs to ensure future safety. It can get expensive and drawn out. So what do? Wait for the report. If it is as good as you think, send it to the HOA with a formal letter demanding they rescind the evacuation order and remove any documentation of structural concerns from your property file. If they refuse, we file a lawsuit for harassment and abuse of authority. That is when things get interesting. Interesting is not the word I would use. It is either that or roll over and let them win. Your call. I thanked him and hung up. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, less like a refuge and more like the center of a fight I did not want but could not avoid. Matthew sent the report at 4 o'clock the next afternoon, exactly 48 hours after the inspection. It was 32 pages long, with photographs, measurements, calculations, and detailed observations about every aspect of the cabin structure. His conclusion was clear and unambiguous. The property showed no signs of structural damage or distress, and was in excellent condition for a structure of its age and type. He gave it a rating of 9 out of 10, noting that the only minor issues were cosmetic, wear on some exterior paint, and a small section of deck railing that could use reinforcement as a preventative measure, not because it was currently unsafe. I forwarded it to Tom immediately. Then I sent a copy to the HOA office with a cover letter demanding the evacuation order be rescinded within 24 hours. Patricia Henderson called me at 8 that evening. "Mr. Young, I have reviewed the engineering report." "Good. So you will rescind the order?" "No. The board has concerns about the methodology and conclusions. The engineer is licensed and certified. His methodology is standard practice. We are seeking a second opinion." "Of course you are." "I am also required to inform you that the board has voted to proceed with emergency remediation of your property based on our independent assessment." "What independent assessment?" "The board conducted its own inspection yesterday." "The board?" "Which consists of you, a retired dentist, a yoga instructor, and a guy who sells insurance. Our expertise is not relevant. We have the authority under the covenants. And who exactly is going to do this remediation? We have contracted with a local construction company. Work will begin Monday morning." "No, it will not." "Mr. Young, if you interfere with the remediation work, we will seek a restraining order and pursue charges for trespassing on HOA-managed property. It is my property, which is subject to HOA oversight under the covenants. I am sorry it has come to this, but you have left us no choice." She hung up. I sat there in the growing darkness, fury and disbelief warring in my chest. This was insane. This was illegal, but it was also happening. I called Tom. He was not happy. "They are bluffing," he said. "They have to be. No construction company would take on work like this without the owner's permission. It is a liability nightmare. What if they are not bluffing? Then we get an injunction first thing Monday morning. I will file the paperwork tomorrow. But Danny, you need to understand something. This is going to get ugly and expensive. HOA fights always do. Are you prepared for that?" "I do not have much choice." "There is always a choice. You could sell, move somewhere without an HOA and save yourself months of stress. This is my home." "I know. I just wanted to make sure you were sure." I was sure, but I was also scared in a way I had not been since Susan got her cancer diagnosis. This felt like being trapped on a conveyor belt moving toward something terrible, unable to stop or get off. I called Matthew next. "Dad," I heard. "I am so sorry. Not your fault. The report was perfect. They called my boss today. Complained that I was biased and unprofessional. They are threatening to sue the company if we do not retract the report." "Can they do that?" "No, but it is still a pain in the ass." "My boss asked if I had any personal connection to you. I told him the truth. And he is backing me up. The report stands. But Dad, this is getting complicated." "I know, but I am glad you were the one who did the inspection. At least I know it was done right." We talked a bit more before hanging up. I did not sleep well that night, lying awake listening to the wind in the pines and wondering how my peaceful retirement had turned into this. Saturday morning, I drove down to the county records office in Castle Rock to do some research. If the HOA was going to fight dirty, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The property records showed that Larkspur Ridge was originally developed by a company called Front Range Properties in 2009, right before the housing market crashed. The development had been planned for 200 homes, but only 97 were ever built before the company went bankrupt. The HOA was established in 2010, with the original developer maintaining control of the board until at least half the lots were sold. That transfer happened in 2013, when control shifted to homeowner-elected board members. Patricia Henderson had been elected president 3 years ago, replacing a guy named Bob Wilson who apparently moved to Arizona. What was interesting was the recent activity. In the past year, there had been 6 forced sales of properties in the development, all due to HOA liens for unpaid assessments or violation fines. That seemed like a lot for a community of 97 homes. I dug deeper, pulling records on those 6 properties. 4 of them had been sold to the same buyer, a company called Mountain Vista Holdings, LLC. The sales were all well below market value, between 20% and 30% less than comparable properties. I wrote down the information and drove back up to Larkspur, my mind working through possibilities. 6 forced sales in 1 year, 4 of them to the same company. And now, the HOA was trying to condemn my property based on fake structural damage. Back at the cabin, I started searching online for Mountain Vista Holdings. It took some digging, but I eventually found the registration documents filed with the Colorado Secretary of State. The company had been formed 18 months ago. The registered agent was a lawyer in Denver, and the principal officers were listed as Patricia Henderson and her husband, Gerald Henderson. There it was. The HOA president was using her authority to force homeowners out, then buying their properties through her LLC at below-market prices. It was fraud. It was abuse of authority. And it was probably criminal. I called Tom immediately. "Danny, it is Saturday, I know, but I found something." I explained what I had discovered. He whistled low. "That is big. That is really big. If you can prove she is using her HOA position to personally profit from forced sales, she is looking at criminal charges. Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, possibly racketeering if the pattern is extensive enough." So what do? First, we document everything. Get copies of all those property records, the sales documents, the HOA minutes approving the liens and sales. Second, we still file for the injunction on Monday to stop any work on your cabin. Third, we contact the district attorney and report this. If they think there is a case, they will investigate. And if they do not, then we file a civil suit and make her life hell anyway. But Danny, this is good. This gives us leverage. She is not going to want this information going public. We spent another hour on the phone mapping out the strategy. By the time we hung up, I felt like I was finally on solid ground again. Sunday passed quietly. I half expected someone from the HOA to show up, but no one did. I spent the day preparing for whatever was coming, making copies of documents, organizing my evidence, and trying to stay calm. Monday morning at 7:30, a white pickup truck pulled up to my cabin. It had Hanson Construction printed on the side. 2 men got out, both wearing work boots and high-vis vests. I met them at the door. "Can I help you?" The older of the 2, a guy with gray stubble and tired eyes, checked his clipboard. "We are here to do structural repairs on this property. HOA work order. No one is doing any repairs." "There is nothing to repair. Look, buddy, I am just doing what I was hired to do. You got a problem, take it up with the HOA. I am the property owner, and I am telling you that you do not have permission to do any work here. He frowned. The work order says the HOA has authority to proceed with emergency repairs. The work order is fraudulent. There is no emergency, and if you try to do any work without my permission, I will call the sheriff and have you arrested for trespassing and vandalism. The two men looked at each other. The younger one shrugged. I am not getting arrested over some HOA drama. I told you this job seemed weird. We are supposed to start today, the older one said, but he did not sound convinced. Call whoever hired you and tell them the property owner is refusing access. See what they say. He pulled out his phone and walked back to his truck. I could not hear the conversation, but it involved a lot of gesturing and frustrated body language. After about 5 minutes, he came back. All right, we are leaving. But the lady I talked to said they are getting a court order to force you to comply. She was not happy. I am sure she was not. They drove away. I called Tom to let him know what happened. Good. That actually helps us. They tried to proceed without your permission, which shows they know they are on shaky legal ground. I am filing the injunction paperwork this morning. We should have a hearing by Wednesday at the latest. What about the criminal complaint? I am drafting that today. It will go to the Douglas County District Attorney's office tomorrow. But Danny, you need to understand that criminal investigations take time. This is not going to be resolved quickly. I know, but at least it is happening. Tuesday morning, I got a certified letter from the HOA's lawyer. It informed me that the association was filing a lawsuit seeking an order to condemn my property, force my immediate evacuation, and authorize emergency repairs at my expense. They were also seeking damages for my refusal to comply with the evacuation order, attorney's fees, and a permanent injunction preventing me from interfering with HOA business. It was a kitchen sink approach, throwing every possible claim at me in hopes something would stick. Tom said that was a good sign. It meant they were worried. They are trying to intimidate you into settling, he said. Do not let them. I am not going anywhere. Wednesday afternoon, we had our hearing in front of Judge Michael Kramer in Castle Rock. The courtroom was small and smelled like old wood and floor polish. Patricia Henderson was there with her lawyer, a slick-looking guy in his 40s with expensive shoes and a condescending smile. Tom and I sat at the other table. Judge Kramer was in his early 60s, with white hair and reading glasses that he kept adjusting. He listened to both sides, present their arguments. The HOA's lawyer argued that the association had clear authority under the covenants to take emergency action, that my refusal to comply was endangering other residents, and that the engineering report I had provided was biased because the engineer was my son. Tom countered by presenting Matthew's credentials, the detailed report, and my expert testimony based on my 30 years in construction. He also mentioned, carefully, that we had evidence suggesting the HOA president had a financial conflict of interest in forcing property sales. That got the judge's attention. Explain, he said. Tom presented copies of the property records showing the 6 forced sales and the 4 purchases by Mountain Vista Holdings. He showed the company registration listing Patricia and Gerald Henderson as officers. Patricia's lawyer jumped up. Your Honor, this is irrelevant to the immediate question of whether Mr. Young's property poses a safety risk. It is directly relevant to the question of whether the HOA is acting in good faith, Tom shot back. Judge Kramer studied the documents for a long moment. Mrs. Henderson, are you an officer of this company? She looked like she wanted to refuse to answer, but lying to a judge was not an option. Yes, Your Honor. And this company has purchased 4 properties in your development that were subject to HOA forced sales. That is correct, and you voted as HOA president to authorize those sales, the board voted. It was not just me. But you are the president and you voted in favor. Yes, but those properties had legitimate violations. This is completely different, is it? Judge Kramer looked at the HOA's lawyer. Counselor, were you aware of this potential conflict of interest? I was not, Your Honor. Well, you are now, and I have some serious concerns about what I am seeing here. He turned to Tom. Mr. Brennan, I am granting your motion for a preliminary injunction. The HOA is barred from taking any action regarding Mr. Young's property, including any repairs, liens, or forced sale procedures, pending a full hearing on the merits. That hearing is scheduled for. He checked his calendar. 3 weeks from today. In the meantime, I strongly encourage both parties to work toward a settlement. Mrs. Henderson, I also encourage you to consult with your own attorney about the potential legal implications of your business activities related to the HOA. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. Her lawyer gathered his papers quickly, whispering to her as they left the courtroom. Tom and I walked out feeling like we had won the first real battle. That went better than I expected, Tom said. Having the judge notice the conflict of interest on his own is huge. It puts her on the defensive. What happens now? Now we prepare for the full hearing, and we wait to see if the DA picks up the criminal investigation. We went to lunch at a diner in Castle Rock, celebrating the small victory with burgers and beer. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. That feeling lasted until Thursday morning, when I woke up to find someone had spray-painted "Leave" in red letters across my front door. I called the sheriff immediately. A deputy came out, took photos, and filed a report. He was sympathetic but not optimistic. Probably some kid, he said. Or someone from the HOA trying to scare you. Either way, unless we catch them in the act, there is not much we can do. Can you at least increase patrols in the area? I will put in a request. But we are spread pretty thin, Mr. Young. Best advice is to install some security cameras. I spent the afternoon cleaning the paint off my door and ordering a camera system online. It would arrive in 2 days. In the meantime, I started sleeping with my father's old shotgun propped next to the bed. I did not think anyone would try to hurt me, but I was not taking chances. Friday brought another surprise. Matthew called me, his voice tight with anger. Dad, they filed a complaint with the state licensing board. Who did? The HOA. Or their lawyer, claiming that I falsified the engineering report because of our relationship and that I should have my license suspended. Can they do that? They can file the complaint. Whether it goes anywhere is another question, but I have to respond, and it is going to be a pain in the ass. They are trying to discredit the report by going after me personally. I am sorry, Matt. I never wanted you to get dragged into this. I know, and I am not backing down. The report is solid, and I have nothing to hide. But this is exactly the kind of harassment that makes me hate HOA cases. We talked for a while longer. I could hear the stress in his voice, and it made me feel guilty, even though I knew none of this was my fault. This was all Patricia Henderson and her scheme to steal properties from unsuspecting homeowners. The security cameras arrived Sunday morning. I spent the afternoon installing them, one covering the front door, one covering the driveway, and one covering the back of the cabin. They connected to my Wi-Fi and sent alerts to my phone whenever they detected motion. It made me feel slightly more secure, even if it also made me angry that I needed them. Monday morning, Tom called with news. The DA is opening an investigation. They want to interview you next week. That is good, right? It is very good. It means they think there is enough evidence to potentially file charges. They are going to subpoena the HOA's records, interview the previous homeowners who were forced to sell, and look into Patricia Henderson's finances. If they can prove she was using her position for personal gain, she is looking at felony charges. How long will it take? Months, probably. These things always take longer than you want, but in the meantime, it gives us more ammunition for the civil case. The fact that there is an active criminal investigation will make the judge take our claims more seriously. That week passed slowly. I tried to keep busy with normal retirement activities like reading, hiking, and avoiding thinking about the legal battle consuming my life. But it was hard to relax when every car that drove by made me wonder if it was someone from the HOA coming to harass me. The cameras caught plenty of wildlife. Deer, elk, a black bear passing through. But no more vandalism, which was something. Thursday afternoon, I was sitting on my porch reading when a car pulled up. It was not one I recognized, a blue sedan that looked like a rental. The woman who got out was in her early 30s, dressed professionally and carrying a laptop bag. Mr. Young. I am Jennifer Morris with the Castle Rock News Press. I was hoping I could ask you a few questions about the HOA situation. I should have said no. I should have told her to talk to my lawyer, but I was tired of being quiet while Patricia Henderson controlled the narrative. All right, I said. Have a seat. We talked for almost an hour. I told her everything. The bogus evacuation order, the engineering report, the forced sales, Patricia's company buying properties. Jennifer took notes and asked sharp questions that suggested she had already done some research. I have been looking into the HOA for a few weeks now, she said. Another homeowner contacted me about a dispute over a fence, and when I started digging, I found the pattern of forced sales. Your case is just the most recent. So you are writing a story about this. If you are willing to go on the record, yes. The public has a right to know when HOA boards are abusing their authority, and other homeowners in your development deserve to know what is happening. Use my name. I have got nothing to hide. The story ran on Sunday, front page of the local section. The headline read, Larkspur Ridge HOA President under investigation for property scheme. It detailed the forced sales, Mountain Vista Holdings, and the attempt to condemn my cabin despite a clean engineering report. It quoted me, Tom, and two other homeowners who had been forced to sell their properties. One of them, a retired school teacher named Dorothy Fisher, said she had been pressured to sell after the HOA claimed her property had fire code violations that did not actually exist. The article also noted that the Douglas County District Attorney's Office had confirmed an active investigation into potential fraud and abuse of authority. By Monday morning, my phone was ringing off the hook. Other homeowners in the development, people I barely knew, were calling to share their own stories of HOA harassment. Some had been fined for violations they did not commit. Others had been threatened with liens for refusing to make unnecessary repairs. A pattern emerged of Patricia Henderson targeting older homeowners, people on fixed incomes who could not afford to fight back legally. Tom suggested we organize a homeowner meeting. If enough people are willing to speak up, we can petition to recall the entire HOA board. That would solve a lot of problems. We held the meeting Tuesday evening at the community center, a small building near the HOA office that was rarely used. 23 people showed up, which was almost a quarter of the development. Patricia Henderson was not invited. I stood at the front of the room and explained what was happening, showed them the property records and sales data, and outlined the legal strategy. Tom explained the recall process and what would be required. We need signatures from at least 30% of homeowners to trigger a recall election, he said. That is about 30 people. Then we need a majority vote to remove the current board and elect new members. It is doable, but it requires commitment. A man in his 50s named Frank Archer raised his hand. I am in. Patricia fined me $2,000 last year because she said my deck was not up to code. I had to hire an engineer to prove her wrong, and it cost me $3,000. I will sign anything you put in front of me. Others shared similar stories. By the end of the meeting, we had 26 people willing to sign the recall petition. Tom said he would have the paperwork ready by Friday. Wednesday morning, I had my interview with the assistant district attorney, a sharp woman in her 40s named Karen Phillips. She asked detailed questions about the timeline, the evacuation order, the engineering report, and my interactions with Patricia Henderson. She was particularly interested in the phone call from the HOA's lawyer offering me money to leave. That suggests they knew there was nothing wrong with the property, she said. Why offer to pay for your relocation if the cabin was actually unsafe? It does not make sense unless the real goal was to get you out so they could force a sale. That is what I thought. We are building a case, Mr. Young, but I need you to understand that these investigations take time, and there is no guarantee we will be able to file charges. We need to prove criminal intent, not just bad judgment. I understand. I just want her to stop. The civil case will help with that, but if we can prove fraud, she is looking at prison time. Friday, we submitted the recall petition with 32 signatures. The HOA was required to hold an election within 60 days. Patricia Henderson responded by sending a letter to all homeowners claiming that the recall was being organized by disgruntled residents who refused to follow community rules, and that the criminal investigation was a baseless attack orchestrated by me and my lawyer. Nobody believed her. The full hearing on the injunction was scheduled for the following Wednesday. Tom spent the weekend preparing, gathering every piece of evidence we had. Matthew submitted a supplemental report responding to the licensing board complaint, documenting his methodology in even greater detail, and including peer reviews from 2 other engineers who confirmed his conclusions. Tuesday night, Patricia Henderson's lawyer called Tom with a settlement offer. They would drop all claims against my property, rescind the evacuation order, and pay my legal fees in exchange for me agreeing to drop the civil lawsuit and not cooperate with the criminal investigation. Tom called me immediately. "What do you think?" he asked after explaining the offer. "I think they are scared. They are definitely scared. This is a white flag offer. But Danny, it would end the immediate problem. You could go back to your normal life. And let her get away with what she did to all those other people. The criminal investigation would continue even without your cooperation. You are not the only victim. No, I did not start this fight to walk away before it is finished. We go to the hearing tomorrow." I was hoping you would say that. Wednesday morning, the courtroom was more crowded than before. Several other homeowners from the development showed up to watch, along with Jennifer Morris from the newspaper. Patricia Henderson sat at her table looking like she had not slept in days. The judge heard arguments from both sides. The HOA's lawyer tried to argue that the emergency repairs were necessary regardless of the engineering report, that the HOA had a duty to protect residents even if individual homeowners disagreed with their assessment, and that my refusal to cooperate was setting a dangerous precedent. Tom methodically destroyed every argument. He presented the engineering report, the supplemental peer reviews, my expert testimony, and documentation of the forced sales. He argued that the HOA's actions were not about safety, but about forcing me to sell so Patricia's company could buy the property at below market value. Your Honor, this is not an HOA acting in the interest of the community. This is an individual using a position of authority to enrich herself at the expense of homeowners who trusted her to protect their interests. Mr. Young's property is safe, has always been safe, and the HOA knows it. They simply do not care because the truth does not serve their actual agenda. Judge Kramer listened carefully, asking occasional questions. When both sides finished, he took a short recess to review the materials. When he returned, he looked unhappy. I have reviewed the evidence and I am troubled by what I see. The engineering report is thorough, professional, and credible. The HOA has provided no credible evidence of structural damage. The pattern of forced sales and the financial relationship between the HOA president and the purchasing company raises serious questions about motive and good faith. I am making the preliminary injunction permanent. The HOA is barred from taking any action against Mr. Young's property. Furthermore, I am ordering the HOA to remove all references to structural concerns from Mr. Young's property file and to issue a formal retraction of the evacuation order. The HOA is also responsible for Mr. Young's legal fees to date. This order is effective immediately. Patricia Henderson stood up. Your Honor, the HOA has a right to sit down, Mrs. Henderson. I am not finished. I am also ordering the HOA to provide the court with a full accounting of all forced property sales in the past 3 years, including the identity of the purchasers and the prices paid. That accounting is due within 30 days. If I find evidence of improper conduct, I will refer the matter to the State Attorney General for investigation. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Your Honor, her lawyer said quietly. We left the courtroom victorious. The other homeowners who had attended congratulated me, shaking my hand and thanking me for fighting. Frank Archer clapped me on the back. You did it, man. You actually beat them. We are not done yet, Tom reminded everyone. The recall election still needs to happen, and the criminal investigation is ongoing. But this is a good day. Jennifer Morris interviewed me outside the courthouse, and the story ran the next day with the headline, Judge rules against HOA in property dispute, orders financial audit. The following week was quiet. I went back to my normal routine, trying to decompress from the stress of the past month. The recall election was scheduled for early April, 6 weeks away. Tom said the HOA was required to hold it even if Patricia resigned, which she showed no signs of doing. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, I got a call from Ada Phillips. Mr. Young, I wanted to give you a heads up. We are filing charges tomorrow morning. Against Patricia Henderson, against Patricia and Gerald Henderson, and against Richard Lansing, the HOA's lawyer. 6 counts of fraud, 4 counts of breach of fiduciary duty, and 2 counts of criminal conspiracy. If convicted, they are looking at significant prison time. What about the properties they already took? That will be part of the restitution. If they are convicted, the victims can sue to recover their losses. The state may also seek to dissolve Mountain Vista Holdings and return the properties to the original owners or their estates. That is good. That is really good. It is. But I need to warn you that this is going to get more attention. The press is going to be all over this and the defendants are going to fight hard. You may be called to testify at trial. I am ready. The arrests happened Thursday morning. Patricia and Gerald were taken into custody at their home in Castle Rock. Richard Lansing was arrested at his office in Denver. All 3 were charged and released on bond the same day, but the damage was done. The story made the front page of the Denver Post. HOA president charged with fraud in property scheme. The recall election became almost a formality after that. Patricia Henderson resigned from the HOA board 2 days after her arrest, along with the other 2 board members who had voted with her on the forced sales. The election proceeded anyway, with a slate of new candidates running on a platform of transparency and accountability. Matthew took a personal day to drive down and vote with me. The new board was elected unanimously. Their first act was to hire an independent auditor to review the HOA's finances and practices. Their second act was to issue formal apologies to everyone who had been targeted by the previous board, including me. The criminal trial was scheduled for September. Tom said it would probably be delayed multiple times, which was normal for complex fraud cases. In the meantime, I was contacted by 3 other homeowners who wanted to file civil lawsuits against Patricia and Gerald Henderson personally. Tom referred them to other attorneys since he was already representing me, but he said the cases were strong. By late May, things had finally settled into something resembling normal. The paint was long gone from my front door, the security cameras recorded nothing but wildlife, and I could sit on my porch without waiting for the next crisis. Matthew came up for a weekend visit in early June. We spent Saturday hiking up to one of the alpine lakes, something we used to do when he was a kid. The wildflowers were just starting to bloom, and the aspens were that bright spring green that only lasts a few weeks. "I am proud of you, Dad," he said as we sat by the water eating sandwiches. "For what? For fighting. A lot of people would have just given up and moved. This is my home. I was not going to let some corrupt HOA president take it from me. Still, it took guts." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the water and the mountains. "The licensing board dismissed the complaint, by the way," Matthew said. "Took them 3 months, but they concluded there was no merit to it. I figured they would. Your report was solid. Thanks, and thank you for not dragging me into the mess more than necessary. I know it was tempting to make a bigger deal about the fact that I am your son. You are a professional. You did your job professionally. That is all that mattered." We hiked back down as the sun was setting, turning the peaks orange and gold. Back at the cabin, we grilled steaks and drank beer and talked about everything except HOAs and lawsuits. The trial finally happened in October, almost 8 months after the initial evacuation notice was posted on my door. Patricia and Gerald Henderson both pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for testimony against Richard Lansing, the lawyer. He went to trial and was convicted on 4 counts of fraud and conspiracy. Patricia was sentenced to 3 years in prison, Gerald to 2 years, and Lansing to 5 years. All 3 were ordered to pay restitution totaling over $600,000 to the victims of their scheme. Mountain Vista Holdings was dissolved, and the 4 properties it had purchased were sold at auction, with the proceeds going to the original homeowners or their families. Dorothy Fisher, the retired schoolteacher, received a check for $82,000, which she said was enough to pay off her medical bills and take her grandchildren to Disney World. The new HOA board implemented sweeping reforms, including term limits for officers, mandatory financial audits, and a requirement that all emergency actions be reviewed by an independent attorney before implementation. They also reduced the annual dues by 20% after discovering that the previous board had been padding the budget to fund Patricia's salary as president, which was supposed to be a volunteer position. I attended the annual homeowner meeting in November, the first one I had been to in 5 years. The new president was a retired accountant named Susan Ward, who seemed more interested in fixing potholes than harassing residents. She publicly thanked me for exposing the corruption and said the community was better for it. Afterward, several people came up to shake my hand and thank me personally. Frank Archer invited me to join a poker game he ran every other Thursday. Dorothy Fisher gave me a hug and said I was a hero, which was embarrassing but also kind of nice. I drove home that night feeling like I had finally turned a corner. The cabin was warm and familiar, the same refuge it had always been. I made dinner, poured a bourbon, and sat by the fire reading a book I had been meaning to get to for months. Outside, snow was starting to fall again, the first real storm of the season. But this time, I watched it without worry. My cabin was sound, my property was secure, and the HOA was finally working the way it was supposed to, serving the community instead of exploiting it. Matthew called the next morning to check on me. How was the meeting? Good. Boring, actually, which is exactly how HOA meetings should be. He laughed. I am glad it is finally over. Me too. Thank you for everything, Matt. I could not have won this without your report. You would have found a way. You are too stubborn to lose. I prefer to think of it as determined. Stubborn. We argued about it for a while, the way we always did, and it felt normal and good. After we hung up, I went outside to shovel the porch. The snow was light and powdery, easy work. A couple of deer were browsing in the trees nearby, unconcerned by my presence. The mountains were hidden in clouds, and the air smelled like pine and winter. This was why I had bought the cabin. This was what I had fought to keep, not just the building but the life it represented. The freedom to live on my own terms, to wake up each morning surrounded by beauty and peace, to spend my days doing what I wanted instead of what someone else demanded. Patricia Henderson had tried to take that from me, and she had failed. Not because I was particularly special or brave, but because I had refused to accept injustice and had been lucky enough to have the resources and support to fight back. A lot of people were not that lucky. Dorothy Fisher had lost her home before she could afford to hire a lawyer. Others had given up rather than face the stress and expense of a legal battle. That was the real crime, I thought. Not just the fraud and theft, but the abuse of power that made people feel helpless. The way HOAs, which were supposed to protect property values and maintain communities, could be weaponized by individuals who saw them as opportunities for personal gain. The reforms the new board had implemented were good, but they were only as strong as the people enforcing them. In 5 years or 10, someone else might come along with the same kind of ambition Patricia Henderson had. The only real protection was an engaged community willing to pay attention and push back. I finished shoveling and went inside. The cabin was warm, the fire crackling in the fireplace. I made coffee and sat down at the kitchen table with the newspaper. There was a small article about the sentencing, buried on page 6 of the local section. It mentioned the prison terms and restitution, but did not go into much detail about how the scheme had worked or how many people had been affected. I thought about calling Jennifer Morris to suggest a follow-up story, something that would document the full scope of what had happened and provide a warning to other homeowners in other communities. But then, I decided I was done being the public face of HOA reform. I had told my story, helped expose the corruption, and testified at trial. That was enough. Other people could carry the torch now. Over the next few weeks, I settled back into retirement for real this time. I joined Frank's poker game and discovered I was pretty good at Texas Hold'em. I volunteered at the local library in Castle Rock, helping with their literacy program one afternoon a week. I took a woodworking class and started building a bookshelf that would probably take me 6 months to finish. Matthew visited for Thanksgiving, bringing his girlfriend Rachel, who I had only met once before. She was a teacher in Boulder, smart and funny, and I liked her immediately. We cooked a turkey that was slightly overdone but still delicious and spent the evening playing board games and telling stories. As they were leaving Sunday morning, Matthew pulled me aside. "I am thinking about proposing," he said quietly. "To Rachel." "No, Dad," to the mailman. "Yes, to Rachel." "Smart ass, I like her. Your mother would have liked her too." His expression softened. "You think so? I know so. She is good people." "Thanks, Dad, and seriously, thank you for everything this year. I know it was hard, but you handled it right." We both did. He hugged me, something he did not do often enough, and then they drove away. I stood on the porch watching until his car disappeared around the curve, feeling grateful for family and second chances, and the simple fact that I was still here in my cabin, living the life I had worked so hard to build. Christmas came and went quietly. I drove to Boulder to spend the day with Matthew and Rachel, exchanging presents and eating too much ham. On the drive back, I stopped at Susan's grave in Castle Rock, something I tried to do every few months. I cleared the snow from her headstone and told her about everything that had happened, about the HOA and the trial and Matthew's plans to propose. I liked to think she could hear me, though I did not really believe in that sort of thing. But it made me feel better anyway, keeping her part of my life even though she was gone. The new year came, bringing more snow and cold. I spent January reading, hiking on snowshoes, and working on the bookshelf. February was more of the same. By March, the whole HOA situation felt like something that had happened to someone else. A story I could tell at parties without feeling the anger and stress that had consumed me a year before. In April, Matthew called to tell me he had proposed and Rachel had said yes. They were planning a fall wedding in Boulder. Would I be willing to give a toast at the rehearsal dinner? Of course, I said. I would be honored. Great, and Dad, I want to say something and I need you to just listen for a minute. Okay. Thank you for showing me what it means to stand up for what is right, even when it is hard. Watching you fight the HOA, watching you refuse to back down even when things got ugly, that meant something to me. It reminded me why integrity matters and why you cannot just let powerful people push you around. So thank you. I am proud to be your son. I had to clear my throat before I could answer. That means a lot, Matt. More than you know. We talked for a while longer, about wedding plans and honeymoon ideas, and whether they should buy a house or keep renting. Normal, everyday conversations that felt precious after the drama of the previous year. Spring came to the mountains slowly, the snow melting in patches, revealing brown grass that would green up by May. I spent my days working in the yard, repairing the deck railing that Matthew had noted in his report, and planning a garden for the summer. The new HOA sent out a newsletter in May, highlighting the community improvements they had made with the recovered dues money. New playground equipment at the park, fresh gravel on the roads, a community cleanup day scheduled for June. It was the kind of boring, functional communication an HOA should send, focused on actual community needs instead of manufactured crises. I saw Patricia Henderson one last time, in late June, completely by accident. I was in Castle Rock running errands when I spotted her coming out of a grocery store. She looked older, thinner, her hair gone gray. She was wearing plain clothes, jeans and a sweatshirt, nothing like the designer outfits she used to favor. Our eyes met for a second. I saw recognition, then shame, then anger cross her face in quick succession. I nodded once, not hostile but not friendly either, just acknowledging her existence. She looked away and hurried to her car. I did not feel triumphant or vindicated. Mostly I just felt sad. Sad that someone had thought it was acceptable to hurt people for money. Sad that it had taken a legal battle and criminal charges to stop her. sad that some of the damage she caused could never be fully repaired, but I also felt grateful. Grateful that I had been able to fight back, that the system had eventually worked, that justice had been served even if it took longer than it should have. And grateful that I could walk away from that chance encounter and go back to my life, while she had to live with the consequences of her choices. The wedding happened in September, at a small venue in Boulder with views of the Flatirons. Matthew and Rachel looked happy, surrounded by friends and family, starting their lives together. I gave my toast at the rehearsal dinner, talking about love and partnership and the importance of building a life with someone you respected. I talked about Susan and how much I missed her and how happy I was that Matthew had found someone who made him as happy as his mother had made me. There were tears, mine included, but they were good tears. The kind that come from gratitude and love, and the bittersweet recognition that life moves forward whether we are ready or not. Driving back to Larkspur that night, I thought about everything that had happened in the past year and a half. The storm, the notice, the fight, the victory. It had been exhausting and stressful and at times terrifying. But it had also been necessary, not just for me, but for everyone in the community who had been victimized by Patricia Henderson's scheme. And in a strange way, it had reminded me that I was not done yet. That retirement did not mean checking out or giving up or just waiting around to die. It meant having the freedom to choose what mattered, to fight for what was right, to stand up and be counted when it mattered most. I pulled up to my cabin just after midnight. The porch light was on, welcoming me home. Inside, everything was exactly as I had left it. The bookshelf I had been building for 9 months was nearly finished, just needed sanding and staining. The fire was ready to light, kindling and logs arranged in the fireplace. My book was on the side table, bookmark holding my place. I made tea instead of coffee, decaf because it was late, and sat in my favorite chair by the window. The moon was bright enough to cast shadows, illuminating the pine trees and the mountains beyond. This was my life now. Not dramatic or exciting, but mine. Earned through decades of work, fought for when it was threatened, and appreciated more deeply because I knew how easily it could have been taken away. I thought about the people who had helped me along the way. Tom, who had provided expert legal counsel and steady guidance. Matthew, whose professional integrity and detailed engineering report had been crucial to winning the case. Jennifer Morris, whose journalism had brought public attention to the corruption. The other homeowners who had signed the recall petition and shared their stories. Even Judge Kramer, who had seen through the HOA's deceptions and made the right call. None of us had done it alone. That was the lesson, I supposed. That fighting corruption and abuse of power required community, required people willing to support each other and stand together. Patricia Henderson had counted on isolation, on individual homeowners being too scared or too broke or too tired to fight back. She had miscalculated. I finished my tea and banked the fire for the night. Upstairs, my bedroom was cool and dark. I lay down in bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the cabin settling, the wind in the trees, an owl calling somewhere in the distance. Tomorrow I would finish sanding the bookshelf. I would drive to Castle Rock for the poker game. I would call Matthew to see how the honeymoon planning was going. Normal, everyday things that made up a life. But tonight, I just felt grateful. Grateful to be here in my cabin, safe and secure and free. Grateful that justice had been served and the corrupt had been held accountable. Grateful for family and friends and second chances. I fell asleep thinking about spring, about planting the garden I had planned, about watching another season change from my front porch. The cabin had weathered the storm, literal and metaphorical, and so had I. And that was enough.